Recently, I attended Portfolio Day at my daughter's school. We got to look at sample pieces from every subject and different points in the year in her portfolio from second grade. It was a wonderful opportunity to enter her world and share the joy of learning with her. She had selected pieces from math, reading, science, social studies, and writing, the explicit curriculum of her applied learning program. But something else caught my eye in the classroom. As Aaron mentioned during the Time for All Ages, there was a poster listing the respect agreement of the class. Help others, play with everyone, use kind words, use classroom materials appropriately, and listen. Notice that one goes for both students and the teacher. And they all signed their names at the bottom, including Mrs. Reed, the teacher. I looked at this poster and I thought, that's a classroom covenant. The implicit curriculum in this classroom includes how to get along harmoniously in a group. Now, when I first saw this a week and a half ago, I was pleased by this poster and what it represented. It made me feel good about our choice of school for our child. This weekend, on the heels of yet another mass shooting in one of our nation's schools, this one in Texas, the need for building this kind of community where people practice relationships of mutual support and respect takes on greater urgency for me. Now, perhaps it shouldn't have been so surprising to me to see something resembling a covenant in a public school. After all, the way our Puritan forebears organized their churches had a strong influence on the formation of American democracy. The founders of our nation were inspired by the democratic governance in those Puritan churches and incorporated similar features into the political design of the new United States. Most people who attend a membership class before joining a Unitarian Universalist church like ours hear something about the congregational polity distinctive to our tradition, how our congregations elect their own leaders, call their own ministers, and design their own process of becoming a member. But just as important as that bottom-up structure is what brings discipline to our collective endeavor, which is how we covenant with one another and with other congregations in our association of congregations to serve each other in the world. We use covenants to express the values that will guide us as we work together to carry out our mission. One of the many inserts today in your order of service contains a covenant for Westside that members will be voting on at the congregational meeting on June 10th. Now, if you've been around here for a while, this is undoubtedly not the first time you have encountered covenants at Westside. There are several different kinds of covenants. Covenants of purpose clarify what we're here to do. The affirmation we say every Sunday in worship is a good example. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve others in community, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with creation. That's why we come here together. Another kind of covenant is a behavioral covenant. It captures our commitments to each other about how we will treat each other. Many groups within the congregation may establish this kind of covenant, from classes for children and adults, to groups like the Young Adult Group and the Adult Forum, to our board of directors and some of our committees. The new relational covenant we are working to put in place would pertain to every person and group in the congregation, whether or not a group also has its own more specific behavioral covenant. Our covenants today might use different language than those of our Puritan ancestors, from whom the Unitarians branched off, but they serve a similar function. Historian Conrad Wright offers a brief chronicle of the role of covenants. When New England Puritans gathered in their churches, he says, they wrote out covenants by which the members agreed to walk together in mutual fellowship and commitment to one another as well as to Jesus. The earliest New England covenants, of which we have a record, were simple statements. The Salem Covenant of 1629 is as follows: "We covenant with the Lord and one with another, and do bind ourselves in the presence of God, to walk together in all his ways, according as he is pleased to reveal himself unto us in his blessed word of truth." Wright points out that while there are words here with theological significance, such as Lord and God and his blessed word of truth, this was not a creedal statement. The operative words here are not "we believe." Rather, they are "we do bind ourselves to walk together." So the covenant is about how we relate to one another, our commitment to walk together in the way of love. If the word covenant itself gives you pause, coming from long use in Jewish and Christian traditions, you might instead mentally call this a respect agreement, like they did in my child's public school classroom. Or think of it in the Buddhist sense of right relationship. Whatever we call them, respect and love are what this kind of covenant is all about. And these commitments are not something to be taken lightly. By agreeing to do the work of relationships, even through times of disagreement or hurt feelings, covenants foster intimacy in our relationships with one another. We're asked not only to be kind, but to be real with each other. Covenants are vows of commitment. If you were excited to witness the marriage vows spoken yesterday by Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, you can deny it, but I know somebody here streamed it. Take note. You have a chance right here at Westside to do more than witness vows. You can help write them and help live them. If it helps draw your interest, we even have at least one member with a British accent in this congregation. Living up to our promises is not always easy. As human beings, we will make mistakes. What a covenant asked us to do is to approach our relationships with some discipline. You might even think of living into covenant as a spiritual practice. Just as a child in a classroom may at some point forget to listen or to use kind words, but can return to those practices as soon as they realize they have broken the respect agreement. As we sang just a minute ago, though you've broken your vows 1,000 times, ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again, come. Stay in the community. Come back into covenant. If you have said or done something that hurt another, listen to understand the other person's experience. Apologize sincerely for any harm done, whether intended or not, and learn how to keep from causing such hurt again. Continue the spiritual practice of right relationship. Now, the married couple who has unproductive fights or has difficulty staying true to their marriage vows, or maybe finds some of the royal family shocked by their modern choices, would be well advised to seek the support of a counselor. I hope the new royal couple will do that when they need to. There are few couples with successful long-term relationships who could not benefit from such support at one time or another. So you may wonder, what is the equivalent of a counselor in our congregational vows or covenants? Our newly established Right Relations Council exists to promote healthy relationships within the congregation, modeling covenantal relations, educating the congregation, and calling people back into covenant as needed. That's from the group's job description, which also says, in the event that parties in conflict are unable to resolve the conflict unassisted, the Right Relations Council will facilitate and companion them through a process of conflict resolution and the restoration of right relationship. Like a counselor, the Right Relations Council cannot do the work for the people involved, but they may be able to provide a space for the conversations that need to happen and to walk together with the parties in the way of love and respect. Many kinds of differences or disagreements can arise between members of a congregation like Westside. The kind of diversity that we are perhaps most equipped by our tradition to embrace covenantally is a diversity of religious perspectives. UU historian Conrad Wright observes of our tradition, very early in our history as a separate religious body, we insisted that creedal statements are not the proper basis for religious fellowship. More than that, that theological diversity is not only to be tolerated, but to be embraced as a good thing. This is what we stand for and hence who we are, he goes on. We assert the right and duty of each one of us to adhere to his or her understanding of religious truth. Some of us may be theists, some humanists. Some may cherish Christian symbols and definitions of the human condition. Others may find that the Christian tradition no longer speaks to them. We believe deeply that it is possible to respect and even love our companions despite theological differences. Can I get an amen or maybe a heck yeah? That said, we should be mindful as well of the range of political points of view that may be present in our church. Unitarian Universalism is religiously liberal, but not all who embrace the freedom, reason, and tolerance of our heritage think alike in terms of policies, political parties, or the social issues of the day. No one should be ostracized for expressing their sincere views, so long as each person can share their point of view in a way that is respectful of others. One of our groups that is particularly known for its lively discussions of current events is Adult Forum. This program fits in with the intellectual exploration piece of our mission statement, providing a venue for discussing how UU principles and values can be brought into the public square. Opinions are often strong and may diverge, but the long-running Adult Forum program has rarely had serious conflict surface among its participants. People can usually hear each other out and agree to disagree. But last fall, Forum co-conveners alerted church leadership that they had someone visiting Forum regularly for a while who had become rather agitated. He was in the minority among participants in his political views, and expressed that he came to Forum to try to figure out why other people think the way they do. Initially, he had been cordial in interactions, but then his demeanor took a turn, and one Sunday he became particularly angry and belligerent. One of our Forum co-conveners told me at the time, "We have no problem with someone who has a different point of view, but his visits are becoming very charged. And he comes across as wanting to intimidate people and pick fights." They were concerned about the escalation of incivility and felt that the polarization the country had seen since the presidential election had now come to Adult Forum. Coming shortly after the church shooting in Sutherland Springs, Texas, also, some Forum regulars were feeling a bit nervous about their safety. What to do? I really respected the care and concern with which our Forum co-conveners and other church leaders addressed this situation. Among other steps, they recognized that the covenant that had been developed in Adult Forum the year before needed to be lifted up for all participants, setting a respectful tone. They also reached out to the angry visitor to let him know about this respect agreement of the group. Like every group in the church that has a covenant, for Adult Forum, living into that covenant is an ongoing practice. We help each other build our skills in walking together in the way of love as we return over and over to those agreements about how we will be together. And by the way, I understand that that settled down in the Forum and hasn't been an issue. Every denomination must have some way of understanding itself, some notion of what gives it its special identity, Conrad Wright notes. For churches like ours, it is the covenant, not the words of any particular covenant, but the covenant relationship of mutual obligation. Wright indicates that unlike creedal or liturgical sources in other traditions, which may be revised only rarely, the congregational covenant must be renewed continuously. This, he emphasizes, means inevitably that there is a special intensity in the search for consensus. Congregational polity allows and encourages people of varied perspectives to come together, but it also requires them to find some essential basis for agreement if they are to stay together. As an association of congregations, that essential basis for agreement, or least common denominator, if you will, are the 7 principles that UU's democratically adopted. Wright makes one other compelling point. He says, every time a new member joins a Unitarian Universalist church, the perspectives that must be accommodated are at least marginally affected. Since the earliest days of Unitarianism in this country, the need to establish and continually renew our covenants has been recognized as central to this free faith. We heard in the moment in UU history about Samuel Barrett. This early Unitarian minister believed that what should be stressed, instead of outward confessions of creed, is something inward, the unseen, unwritten sentiment of love in the heart. A present-day minister, Lisa Ward, contrasts an approach to religion based on creed with one based on covenant. She writes, "A creed creates a static truth, something that does not incorporate new insights and realities. A covenant is a dance of co-creation, keeping in step with one another in the flow of our lives. A creed seeks uniformity and a unison voice. A covenant seeks harmony and a shared voice. Sometimes we may arrive at a unison, but it is not required. A creed gives authority to the statement. A covenant gives authority to shared intention. A creed creates an us and them. A covenant invites relationship. A creed is a prescription that must be relied on. A covenant relies on the treasures of shared truth." So, being a people of covenant is a lot of work. But I, for one, believe it is well worth the effort to anchor our community, our tradition, not in a shared creed, but in the shared relationship that our covenants express. Sometimes, when I get pulled into conflict in the church, which we do have from time to time, I may feel like the conflict has diverted me away from the real work, from visiting those who are ill, participating in social action, developing programs to serve our membership. But then I remember, no, this is the work of the church too. Learning how to love, learning how to be better humans, growing in skill and resilience as we practice how to dwell together in peace and to serve others in community. Some of our greatest learning and growing may come through finding healthy ways of dealing with conflict or disagreement. It takes hard work to become the people we want to be, to live out our 7 principles and our personal convictions. We might think of the community of this church as a practice field. It's not that we won't make mistakes. Mistakes are inevitable. It's that we are committed to the relationships. And if we hurt someone, whether intended or not, we want to mend it. This is walking together. This is living into covenant. It sounds so basic, but it's pretty radical, really. Now, it turns out, I had forgotten this, but I have spoken to you from this pulpit once before about covenants. It was the first time I ever offered a reflection at Westside, at the beginning of candidating week about 2 years ago. At that time, I had been excited to learn that there was some work underway to establish a relational covenant for the whole congregation. The completion of that work got postponed as leaders tried to gauge how much group process and change the congregation could handle at one time. You were, after all, going through the pretty intensive participatory process of choosing a new minister. But we have come back around to the work of establishing a congregation-wide relational covenant, because trust and mutual commitment are so foundational to a healthy congregation, even in times of change, which of course we are in again now with AMS's departure. In fact, during periods of transition and anxiety, it may be especially important for people here to say clearly what commitments we make to each other about how we will walk together. So please do review the draft covenant the Right Relations Council has developed on that insert. They incorporated the input that was gathered a couple of years ago when they put this together, and they welcome your questions and comments before this goes up for a vote at the congregational meeting on June 10th. The insert also indicates how you can connect with them and offer your feedback. I encourage everyone as well, if you can attend the town hall meeting that Tanner mentioned earlier, to do so this Wednesday at 7 p.m. You can hear how things are coming with our transition with Angel Montessori moving out, and learn about a new schedule we're considering for worship come August, and offer your input on that. This too is part of being in relationship with each other, exploring together how best to carry out our mission and vision. May we be not only part of the living tradition of Unitarian Universalism, renewing our covenants with each new member, but let us be leaders in our nation's efforts to learn to walk together in the way of love. Let us bring the power of covenant alive in our own lives and times. May it be so. Amen.